One day, you walk into a room, same smile, same clothes, same energy, and yet the people around you look at you differently. They speak slower, they smile tighter. There's something in the air that wasn't there before. You feel it, but you can't name it. Not yet. That's what happened to Eli. Eli didn't betray anyone. He didn't break any rules. He just stopped saying yes when he meant no. He stopped showing up to prove something. He stopped letting people walk over his silence just because he didn't want conflict. And that was enough to change everything. He used to be the go-to guy, the agreeable one, the one who always stepped up, even when it cost him sleep, pride, or his own truth. He made things easier for everyone, except himself. Until one afternoon, inside a sleek boardroom overlooking San Francisco's skyline, something cracked. Eli's co-founder, Mark, interrupted him mid-sentence for the third time. It wasn't aggressive, just dismissive, as if Eli's ideas were background noise. And this time, instead of swallowing it, Eli calmly said, "Mark, I heard your point. Now it's my turn. Don't interrupt again." You could hear a pin drop. That's when the shift began, not in Mark, but in everyone. Their eyes widened, their tone changed, their posture shifted. The next day, there were fewer handshakes. Smiles didn't last as long. "You okay, Eli? You seem intense lately." It sounded like concern, but it wasn't. See, Eli didn't become a worse person. He became a realer one. And for those who benefited from his silence, his truth was a problem. Because when you stop being easy to control, people don't clap. They get scared. Not because you've harmed them, but because your freedom reminds them they're not free. That's the invisible shift, the one no one warns you about. It's not loud. It doesn't scream. It creeps in through disapproving looks, passive-aggressive jokes, and questions wrapped in fake concern. Are you sure this is the right attitude for someone in your position? Don't you think you're overreacting? You've changed. No, you've awakened, and that's a threat. This is what Stoic philosophy prepares you for, not a life free from resistance, but a life where you are no longer bent by it. Epictetus once said, "No one is free who is not master of themselves." Eli wasn't free when he was liked. He was free when he was whole, whether people liked him or not. So he started keeping a journal, not about business plans or to-do lists, but about truth. When did he feel manipulated? When did guilt sneak in? When did silence feel more like self-betrayal than peacekeeping? With every line he wrote, something inside him sharpened. He wasn't becoming colder. He was becoming clearer, and clarity is dangerous. People started talking. Eli's gotten cocky. He's not a team player. He thinks he's better than everyone else. They weren't describing him. They were reacting to the fact that he no longer needed their permission to exist. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't explain himself. He just kept showing up as himself, and that was enough to make the ground beneath them shake. Because when someone stops dancing to the music you control, your only option is to change the song or leave the room. So let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed how quickly people turn on you when you stop being manageable? When you say no without apology? When you no longer shrink to fit their comfort? If you have, you're not crazy. You're not dramatic. You're just finally seeing the rules of the game and choosing not to play. This story doesn't end in tragedy. It ends in liberation. But to get there, you have to stay with me. Stay until the end. Because what happened next to Eli will either break your heart or give you the courage to rewrite your own story. Before we dive deeper, if you find stories like this meaningful, powerful, or even just a little too real, hit subscribe. That's the best way to support the channel so we can keep bringing you stories that challenge, inspire, and set your mind free. Now, let's test your awareness. Quick question. When someone suddenly treats you coldly after you start setting boundaries, what's the most likely reason? A, they genuinely think you've changed for the worse. B, they're reacting to the loss of control they once had over you. Drop your answer in the comments A or B, and let's see who's been paying attention. Eli thought he understood manipulation. To him, it had always been obvious. Aggressive demands, loud voices, clear power plays. But after he stopped being easy to manage, he discovered a much darker version of it. Quieter, slippery, almost invisible. It began with Jonah. Jonah wasn't just a friend. He was family in every sense that didn't involve blood. They met in college, built dreams over late-night pizza, and stuck together as Eli built his startup in San Francisco. When things got hard, Jonah was there. And when Eli succeeded, Jonah cheered the loudest. At least that's how it seemed. But when Eli began changing, becoming more assertive, less accommodating, Jonah's support twisted. At first it was subtle. "I'm just looking out for you, man," he said after Eli turned down a partnership he once would have accepted. "Don't forget who's always been in your corner." It didn't feel like support. It felt like a leash. Then came the flattery. "Nobody can close like you, Eli. I'd be lost without you. Can you handle this meeting for me?" The words sounded sweet, but Eli could feel the pressure inside them. If he said no, he wasn't just declining a task, he was rejecting Jonah's approval, and that's when he began to see it. Not just with Jonah, but everywhere. Manipulation doesn't always come with a scowl. Sometimes it comes with a smile. It doesn't always yell. Sometimes it whispers in the language of guilt and disguised praise. It doesn't always ask for power. Sometimes it demands loyalty in the name of friendship. Eli began calling it the shadow game, because that's what it was, a quiet effort to bend him without appearing forceful. A game where other people's needs were dressed as concern, where compliments were really instructions, and where emotional leverage replaced honest conversation. He saw it in colleagues too. One manager would say, "You're so good at taking care of these little details, Eli. That's your zone." Framed as a compliment, but it was a box, a way to keep him small. He saw it on social media, a vague tweet that seemed oddly familiar, a post about egos getting in the way of good work right after a disagreement, a well-timed like from someone who hadn't spoken to him in weeks. Digital shadows, silent but calculated. This wasn't accidental. These were strategic plays, and Eli knew it wasn't about love, support, or concern. It was about influence, control, the need to keep him compliant without ever being called a manipulator. One night, Eli sat in his apartment, journal open, reflecting on a conversation with Jonah that left him emotionally exhausted. Jonah had implied that Eli's recent decisions were hurting the team and that he wasn't the same guy anymore. But Eli wasn't the same guy. That was the point. He wrote down a question. What do people get from keeping me agreeable? And just like that, the game revealed itself. People don't just want you to agree because it's easier. They want you to agree because it affirms their view of the world. Your resistance forces them to confront themselves, and not everyone is ready for that. That's why they shift tactics. Not to harm you, but to restore their comfort. So Eli changed his approach. Instead of explaining himself, he paused. Instead of defending his choices, he sat with them. Instead of reacting to guilt, he examined it. He started meditating each morning, not for peace, but for clarity. Clarity to see where emotion was being weaponized against him. Clarity to feel the difference between a real request and a covert demand. And when Jonah tried one final time, after Eli rejected a joint deal that didn't align with his values, he looked Eli in the eye and said, "You really think you're better than us now, don't you?" Eli didn't flinch. He smiled, not with mockery, but with peace, and said, "I don't think I'm better. I think I'm just done being managed." That was the last time Jonah tried to pull the strings. Here's the truth Eli learned. Manipulators don't need to scream when they can make you question yourself. But when you stop reacting, when you strip their tactics of power with calm awareness, everything changes. That's not cruelty. That's clarity. And clarity is how you reclaim your life. When people can't control how you move, they try to control how others see you. Eli didn't understand that until it happened to him. After months of building his startup with discipline, courage, and unshakable commitment to his values, he faced a decision. A high-profile investor, Carla Baines, known across San Francisco for her influence, wanted in on the next funding round, but her terms were aggressive. She wanted veto power over product direction. For Eli, who had spent the last year reclaiming his autonomy, it was non-negotiable. He declined the offer, firmly but respectfully. A week later, the whispers began. At first, they were subtle. A founder he barely knew mentioned he'd heard Eli wasn't as easy to collaborate with as people thought. A journalist he'd once spoken with casually reached out and said, "Off the record, what's really going on with your team?" Then, it became clearer. Carla was talking. She never said Eli's name outright, but she didn't have to. At networking events, in offhand remarks, during meetings with mutual connections, she left just enough ambiguity for people to draw their own conclusions. Some founders don't know how to take advice, she'd say. They confuse control with support. It wasn't slander. It was something worse, strategic reputation distortion. And the scary part? It worked. Investors became more cautious. Partners hesitated. Even team members started asking subtle questions, wondering if they had missed something. After all, when someone with power speaks vaguely but consistently, people listen. Doubt spreads faster than truth. Eli was furious, not because people had questions, but because the story being told wasn't real. It was crafted, a false mirror, designed to reflect someone he wasn't. But he also knew the cost of trying to defend himself against shadows. He remembered something from Marcus Aurelius. If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. He took a walk that night down Market Street, replaying the last few weeks. The temptation to set the record straight, to explain his side, was loud, but a deeper part of him, his wiser part, whispered something else. Your actions will speak louder. Let them. That was the turning point. Eli stopped chasing clarity from others and started embodying it in himself. He doubled down on what he could control: his team, his product, his principles. He initiated one-on-ones with his employees, not to defend himself, but to listen and lead with integrity. He showed up, consistently, calmly, with conviction. And over time, something strange happened. The rumors lost their grip. People who were unsure began to see a different version of the story, not from Eli's mouth, but from his behavior, from the culture he nurtured, from the results he produced, from the way he held his ground without lashing out. One day, an investor who had quietly distanced himself called and said, "I don't know what happened, but I respect how you handled it." That was the moment Eli understood. Reputation is a reflection, but character is the source. You can distort a reflection. You can cast shadows. But eventually, light exposes the truth. Still, it wasn't easy. There were nights Eli stared at his ceiling, wondering if staying silent made him look guilty. He wrestled with the urge to post, to vent, to clear the fog, but he kept coming back to one practice. Each Sunday, he'd sit in his apartment with a candle burning and write in a journal labeled Integrity Manifesto. It wasn't about what people said, it was about what he believed. He wrote his non-negotiables: honesty, clarity, respect, boundaries. If he lived those values, he told himself, the rumors could rage and still lose. The mirror of truth is never about what others see first. It's about what you refuse to compromise when no one's watching. Eli learned that when your truth becomes inconvenient for someone who once held power over you, they won't argue. They'll try to reshape your image. But their version of you isn't your responsibility. You don't need to yell. You don't need to correct every lie. You just need to keep living in a way that makes them unbelievable. At first, Eli thought the silence was coincidence. People were just busy. Deadlines were tight. Everyone had their own lives. That's what he told himself when texts went unanswered, when meetings were rescheduled, when conversations shifted from warm to polite. It didn't happen overnight. It crept in like fog, quiet and disorienting. But eventually, the pattern became undeniable. The invitations stopped. People he once brainstormed with no longer looped him in. Conversations became shallower. Subtle looks were exchanged when he entered a room, as if he were a guest at his own table. He could feel it before he could prove it. Eli was being isolated, and not by accident. It didn't make sense at first. He hadn't betrayed anyone. He hadn't changed who he was, only how much he was willing to be used. But that's all it took. His refusal to bend, to play nice, to go along with every ask, that threatened the unspoken balance others had come to expect. And when people can't control you directly, they don't always confront you. They isolate you, not overtly. That would be too obvious. Instead, they nudge others away from you with phrases like, "He's not the same," or "Something's off with him lately." They ask questions they already know the answer to, planting doubt like seeds. You ever notice how Eli's been acting distant? It works, because doubt doesn't need proof. It just needs repetition. Eli felt the shift in his own team. A junior designer he mentored suddenly stopped engaging. A project manager who once praised his leadership now copied others in emails but left him off. It wasn't mutiny, it was erosion. Slow, quiet, and effective. Isolation is the manipulator's favorite tool because it doesn't just hurt, it weakens. You start questioning yourself. You wonder if you've become too rigid, too difficult, too proud. The loneliness isn't just physical, it's existential. You feel invisible, even when you're seen. Eli had a choice to make. He could chase after the ones pulling away, trying to win them back with softened boundaries and apologies for truths he hadn't betrayed. Or he could stand still and let the storm pass. He chose the second. Instead of chasing approval, he started nurturing authenticity. He reached out to people who had no agenda. His old friend Malik in Austin, a mentor named Teresa who once told him, "The more honest you get, the fewer people you'll need." He reconnected with a small mastermind group he once joined, full of founders who led with principles, not politics. Each conversation reminded him of something he'd forgotten. Not everyone needs you to be easy. The right ones just need you to be real. Seneca once said, "Associate only with those who make you better." Eli understood now that this wasn't just advice, it was a shield. When surrounded by those who feed your growth, you're untouchable. When surrounded by those who fear your independence, you're in constant danger. He created a weekly practice, listing the 5 people who made him feel strongest, most honest, most alive. And then he made time for those people. Calls, coffees, walks in the park, not to vent, not to seek validation, but to anchor himself in truth. And slowly, the loneliness began to fade, not because the others returned, but because they were never meant to stay. Eli realized something liberating. Being isolated by the wrong people is just the universe making space for the right ones. The people who turned away, they weren't enemies, they were mirrors, reflecting what happens when you no longer serve someone's comfort. And once you stop grieving the version of you they loved, the pliable, agreeable, overly available version, you see the gift in their distance. It's space, it's freedom, it's clarity. Eli's team began to rebuild, smaller but sharper. Investors began approaching him not because of hype, but because of consistency. The relationships that remained were fierce in their loyalty. They didn't need Eli to shrink. They just needed him to show up. And he did. Fully. Unapologetically. In the end, isolation didn't break Eli. It refined him. Because when they try to divide you, they expect you to crumble. But when you refuse to chase, refuse to dilute yourself, just to be invited back in, you stop being a player in their game. You become the storm they can't contain. Confidence doesn't vanish all at once. It unravels slowly. One question, one sideways comment, one raised eyebrow at a time. Eli hadn't expected that part. He had been prepared for confrontation, for resistance. But what caught him off guard was the silence between words. The hesitation people placed in his mind like seeds. It began with someone he admired deeply, Professor Callan, a former mentor who had once championed his ideas back in university. They met for coffee during a visit to Palo Alto. Eli had just secured a second round of funding and was laying the foundation for a product pivot that broke every industry expectation. Bold, untested, ambitious. Callan sipped his drink, leaned back and said, "You've always been brilliant, Eli. But do you ever worry you're moving too fast? Sometimes confidence can become something else." He didn't say what that something was. He didn't have to. Eli left the cafe not with anger, but with a pit in his stomach. A seed of doubt had been planted, and it started to grow. That's the trick. People don't always need to criticize you. They just need to make you unsure, to make you look at yourself through their lens, not yours. Eli spent the next week questioning everything. Should he delay the launch? Was his vision too radical? Were the risks he saw as courage really just recklessness? It didn't matter that his strategy was sound, that he'd done the research, or that his gut felt right. Doubt drowned all of that out. Not because it was true, but because it echoed the voice of someone he once trusted. This is the second layer of control, more dangerous than open resistance. When people can't steer your actions directly, they steer your self-belief, and often, it comes from those who seem to mean well. Just being realistic. Just trying to help. I'm only saying this because I care. But their words are loaded, framed to sound wise while making you second-guess what you already know, lie. Had to confront the hardest question of all. Was he wrong to believe in himself? The answer came quietly. One morning, as he stood alone in his office, sun breaking through the windows. He thought back to every time in his life he'd waited for permission. Every time he'd delayed a decision until someone else validated. It made every idea he had toned down to be less disruptive, more reasonable. And what had that ever given him? Approval, applause, but never peace. So he made a decision. If his ideas were going to fail, they'd fail at full volume. Not diluted, not dressed in caution to comfort the people around him. He wouldn't seek credibility in others' comfort zones. He would trust his own. That week, Eli started a new practice. At the end of each day, he wrote down 3 decisions he'd made without second-guessing, no matter how small. He called it his confidence ledger, a record of self-trust. And more than once, that list reminded him he knew what he was doing, even when others didn't. He also stopped over-explaining. When asked about his direction, he shared it simply, clearly, and once. He no longer tried to convince. He led and let time prove him right or wrong, because that's the core of Stoic wisdom. You can't control others' opinions, but you can control how deeply you believe in your own process. It wasn't about arrogance. It was about authority. Over his own path, his own decisions, his own voice. The same mentor who once questioned him, months later reached out again, this time with respect. "I've been watching. You made the right call." Eli smiled when he read the message, but not out of pride, out of confirmation that his silence, his steadiness, his refusal to back down had all been worth it. Confidence isn't about being certain all the time. It's about knowing what matters most to you and refusing to betray it for the comfort of others. People will challenge your choices, your pace, your ideas, not because they're wrong, but because they don't align with their fears. That's not your burden to carry. Your doubt only has power when it's fed. Starve it with self-trust and lead anyway. The final form of control isn't logical. It isn't even subtle. It's emotional. When people realize they can't manipulate you with guilt, can't twist your image, can't make you doubt yourself, there's only one tactic left. They provoke. They come for your calm, your peace, your composure. Because if they can't control your choices, they'll try to control your reactions. It happened to Eli during what should have been a career-defining moment. He had just been invited to speak at a prominent startup summit in Los Angeles, a room full of innovators, VCs, and media. The panel was set. The lights were bright. The topic? Leadership under pressure. Halfway through the Q&A, someone from the audience stood up, a former colleague named Devin, someone Eli had worked with. During his first startup phase, their split had been clean but tense. There were no harsh words, just a growing distance when Eli refused to keep compromising his vision. Now, under those lights, in front of hundreds, Devin's voice cut through the air. "Eli, you talk a lot, about self-trust and leadership. But how do you reconcile that with abandoning the people who built your early success? Gasps. Eyes turned. Cameras zoomed in. It wasn't a question. It was a strike. Not for truth, but for effect. Devon wasn't seeking dialogue. He was setting a trap. One built not from facts, but from emotion. And Eli felt it. The old urge to defend, to justify, to dismantle the accusation with evidence and dates and context. His hands tightened around the mic. His breath caught. He had 1,000 responses lined up, but he didn't use any of them. He looked at Devon, then scanned the room and said calmly, "That's a fair feeling, and I won't argue with feelings, but I've made peace with my path." Then he paused, nodded once, and passed the mic to the next panelist. The silence afterward was heavier than the words, because in that moment, Eli didn't win by defending himself. He won by refusing to be pulled into someone else's storm. That's the power of emotional mastery. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." Stoics don't fight fire with fire. They let the fire die from lack of oxygen. And that was Eli's greatest test. More than rejection, more than rumors, more than doubt. Emotional provocation is personal. It targets the softest parts of you. It invites you to abandon yourself, to lash out, to overreact, to play the villain in someone else's drama. But Eli had trained for this. Months earlier, during his hardest stretch, he created something simple, the pause ritual. 10 seconds, one breath, one internal phrase. I do not respond on command. He used it in meetings, on calls, in moments of conflict. And now, under bright lights and sharpened questions, it carried him. That night, after the event, he walked, alone through the city. He wasn't shaken. He wasn't replaying what he should have said. He felt steady, anchored. Not because he'd silenced a critic, but because he hadn't betrayed his own peace to win a moment. This is the final liberation, when you no longer give anyone the power to pull you out of your character. Control thrives on reaction. It feeds on your need to explain, to be understood, to make someone see your side. But the moment you stop giving it energy, it withers. Eli went on to close his next round of funding. His company grew. His story was no longer one of rebellion or defense. It was one of sovereignty, not the kind that demands attention, the kind that doesn't need it. You see, strength isn't loud, freedom isn't flashy, true control isn't about dominating others. It's about refusing to let anyone hijack your presence. So when they provoke you, when the words are designed to wound, when the spotlight burns and the air thickens, pause, breathe, and let your stillness do the talking. Eli's story is not one of rebellion. It's not even about ambition. It's about the quiet, often painful journey of reclaiming your self-ownership in a world that thrives on silent control. In the beginning, Eli was like many of us, smart, well-liked, eager to do the right thing. He worked hard. He said yes often. He earned approval not by force, but by compliance. And for a while, it worked. People respected him, or so it seemed. But the moment Eli began saying no to manipulative friendships, to bad business deals, to half-truths, to guilt-laced expectations, the ground shifted beneath him. That's when he discovered the unspoken rule of society. People don't mind who you are as long as you're easy to manage. From there, the tests came fast. Manipulation dressed as concern. Lies spread to shape how others saw him. Quiet isolation engineered to shake his confidence. Doubt seeded from voices he once trusted. And finally, emotional provocation. A desperate last move by those who could no longer bend him. Each chapter of Eli's story revealed a deeper truth. The cost of living freely isn't rejection. It's resistance. Not everyone will applaud your independence. Some will resent it. Not because you've hurt them, but because your freedom exposes their fear. But Eli didn't crumble. He didn't lash out. He didn't beg to be accepted. He chose stillness, clarity, integrity, not as a performance, but as a way of being. And through every test, he discovered something most people never do. When you stop needing to be understood, you finally begin to understand yourself. He found strength not in controlling others, but in mastering himself. He learned that boundaries aren't walls, they're doors that only the right people will walk through. And he realized that true peace doesn't come from being liked, it comes from being aligned. That's the power of Stoic philosophy, not in sounding wise, but in staying grounded when the world shakes your roots. So what do we take from this? We live in a time where social pressure is louder than ever, where likes feel like currency and silence is often taken as weakness. But Eli's story shows us a different path, a quieter, firmer, more courageous one. Start by noticing the subtle ways people try to control your energy. Are you making decisions based on fear of disappointing someone? Are you saying yes out of guilt instead of clarity? Are you doubting yourself because someone else is uncomfortable with your growth? Then reclaim your power, not through resistance, but through stillness. Choose what aligns. Say no without apology. Let actions replace explanations. Let peace, not approval, be your proof. Because at the end of the day, control only works if you hand someone the keys. And freedom? It's reclaimed the moment you decide you don't need permission to live in your truth. Now, here's a quick question for you to reflect on. When someone reacts negatively to your new boundaries, what's usually happening? A, you've suddenly become selfish and distant. B, your growth is threatening the comfort they once had with the old you. Drop your answer in the comments, A or B, and let's see how many of you are starting to see through the game, and more. Importantly, I want to hear from you. What part of Eli's story hit home the most? Have you ever felt the silent shift when you stopped being easy to control? Share your experience in the comments so others can learn from your journey too. If you found this story powerful, insightful, or even a little too real, it means it's working. Subscribe to the channel so we can keep creating stories that speak truth, challenge comfort, and most of all, help you come home to yourself.